All right, so are you ready to go on a deep dive? This one's going to be a wild ride, I think. We're going to be unpacking a fictional scenario that's so strange and so darkly comedic that it might leave you wondering if we've, slipped into some kind of alternate dimension.
It's a scenario that uses satire really well to kind of hold up a mirror to our own world. A distorted mirror, but a familiar one in a way. It makes us question everything we think we know about media, power, and, I don't know, the consequences of what we do.
Yeah, so picture this, okay. George Carlin, the comedian. Well, he's just chilling with God. Yeah, God, getting ready for some basketball, hanging out, having some popcorn, and seems like a fun time. But God, well, God's all-knowing, right? So he's
Yeah.
like, nah, let's switch over to Fox News, because he knows something's about to happen, something big, something way more entertaining than basketball.
And this is where it gets interesting. This is where it feels like a cosmic play or something, like a really twisted episode of The Twilight Zone. God's the director, Carlin's our confused guide,
Yeah.
and it's all happening on a real news program.
And what is this big event that's about to happen? Well, it's none other than Tucker Carlson interviewing Charles Manson. Yeah, you heard that right. That controversial media guy sitting down with a convicted cult leader and murderer.
Yeah, and that right there, that pairing, that's our first sign that we're dealing with satire here. Putting those two together, those two figures, they represent such opposite forces, right? It shows us what the creators are trying to do. They want to make us think about who we see as authority figures, who has influence.
Yeah, and it gets even weirder when the interview starts. Carlson's actually praising Manson, calling him, brilliant and spiritual. Can you believe that? I can just imagine Carlin, just throwing popcorn at the TV. And Manson, he just seems totally lost, keeps forgetting Carlson's name. It's crazy.
It is crazy. But this Carlson, fawning all over Manson, it's not just about being funny. It's about something deeper. It's about how these media figures, they have this power to manipulate their audience, make bad people seem okay or even good. It makes you wonder if we've seen this in real life, maybe not as extreme, but, with the same kind of unsettling feeling.
Yeah, and just when you think it can't get any weirder, it takes a turn, a really dark and unexpected one. Manson, he gets triggered by something, a flashback of an uncle he hated who was also named Tucker, and he just snaps, attacks Carlson right there on live TV, stabs him, kills him.
And that violence, it's shocking for sure. But it's not just there for shock value. It's like the thing that makes Carlin start questioning God's role in all this craziness. And it makes us think about violence. It makes you wonder, does violence only ever lead to more violence? Or is there some way to break free from that?
So, picture Carlin's face, right? He's in total shock. Who wouldn't be? Manson just killed a guy on live TV, and the show just keeps going like nothing happened. And then Manson starts telling this story, the story about the frog and the scorpion. What's that about?
That story, that frog and scorpion thing, it's not random. That fable about the scorpion who can't help but sting the frog even though it means they'll both drown. It tells us something about human nature. Some people, they just can't help but cause harm no matter what. But it also makes you think, are they burned that way? Or is it because of what happened to them, their life experiences?
And then it gets even stranger, if you can believe that. The technicians, they just walk over and carry Carlson's body off the set like it's no big deal and replace him with a giant green worm, a giant fluorescent green worm named Slimy. Apparently Slimy's a recurring character in this crazy world. He even won an award for slimiest worm on the planet or something.
Yeah, Slimy. He's like the most absurd part of this whole thing, but he's important too. He's like a symbol of everything that's slippery and dishonest. It's not just about being shocking. It's about these systems of power, how they often care more about their agendas than about people.
And here's the kicker. Slimy starts talking, and he sounds exactly like Carlson. It's eerie.
It is. It's like this guy, this controversial person, gets replaced by a giant worm, and nothing changes. The system just keeps rolling along. It makes you think, how easily could the people in power be replaced, and would anything actually be different? It's kind of scary when you think about it.
Carlin is just speechless at this point, staring at God, who's just laughing it up, saying how much better this is than basketball. And we're left with this image of Carlin shaking his head as the whole thing fades out.
It's a powerful ending, a mix of humor and horror. Leaves you feeling uneasy. There's a lot of questions. Are we just watching all this crazy stuff happen, or can we do something to change it? Change the channel, challenge what we're being told, make the world a less slimy place.
So that's the setup for our deep dive today. Comedy, violence, social commentary, all mixed together. But what does it all mean? What can we learn from this bizarre scenario?
Well, that's what we're going to unpack as we keep exploring.
Okay, so we're talking about this crazy scenario, right?
Yeah.
With Carlin and God just watching this whole mess unfold on Fox News. It's like someone took everything that's messed up about media today. You know, all the crazy stuff, the fighting, the people who think they're like, I don't know, superstars or something, and then they threw in God just to spice things up even more.
It's a lot to take in. It's entertaining, but it also makes you feel a little uneasy. It's like they're using humor to show us how ridiculous we are, especially when it comes to how much we just accept what the media tells us.
Yeah, it's almost like they're saying, okay, we know this is insane, but is it really that different from what's happening in the real world?
Right, exactly. And they use these people we know, like Carlin and Carlson, but then they mix in these crazy things, like God just chilling out on the couch, loving reality TV. It's a weird combo, but it works.
Yeah, and it's that weirdness that makes it work. You know, it makes the satire hit harder. Like, think about Carlson praising Manson. It's so over the top, so ridiculous. But it also makes you think about, like, do these media people actually have that much power? Can they really make us believe anything?
It's scary to think about, right? Are we that easy to manipulate? And this is where it goes beyond just being funny. It starts to ask these big questions about responsibility. If you have a platform, if people are listening to you, do you have a responsibility to be careful with what you say?
Yeah, and it's not just about like selling us stuff, right? It's about shaping how we see the world.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets dangerous.
Exactly. And then you have that whole scene with Manson killing Carlson on live TV. It's brutal.
Yeah, I'm not going to forget that image anytime soon. It's not just the shock value, though.
It's more than that. It's a symbol, right? It's like Manson represents all this hatred and chaos, and he's infecting the system. And Carlson, well, he becomes another victim of that infection.
So you're saying violence just leads to more violence? And if we want to stop it, we have to look at the root cause, not just the symptoms.
Right. We have to challenge these stories that tell us to hate each other, to see each other as enemies. It's about understanding that we're all human.
Okay, and then there's Slimy, this giant worm that takes Carlson's place. I mean, that's just straight up bizarre.
That is bizarre. But Slimy is important, too. He represents how these systems, these ways of talking and thinking, can just keep going, no matter who's in charge. It's like saying the system is more powerful than the people in it.
It's like those comedy skits where they have different actors play the same character, and it doesn't matter who it is, the joke is the same.
Yeah, but in this case, it's not really funny. It's like, are we paying too much attention to the people in charge and not enough to the systems that are really running things?
And what about God in all this? He's like the mastermind, just watching it all happen and finding it hilarious.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? It's like they're showing us that we don't really understand God or how the universe works. It makes you think about free will, you know? Do we really have control over our own lives?
It's like God works in mysterious ways, taken to a whole new level. And it also makes you think about what divine justice really means. Is it just about seeing bad people get what they deserve? Or is it something more than that?
It's a big question. And this scenario doesn't give us the answer, but it makes us think about it, challenge our ideas about right and wrong.
It's almost like God is using this whole thing to teach us a lesson, you know? Like, look at yourself. This is ridiculous. Don't you see how absurd this all is?
I think you're right. It's about waking us up to how crazy the systems we've built are, how much we just accept without thinking, and the consequences that come from that.
So it's not just about pointing fingers and complaining about how bad things are. It's about taking responsibility, waking up and doing something to make things better. Well, we spent this deep dive talking about this really crazy scenario, right? With Carlin and God watching Tucker Carlson, well, meet his end and then get replaced by this, like, giant worm. It's crazy, but it makes you think, you know?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, it's funny, but it's also kind of disturbing, and I think that's why it sticks with you. It's like, under all that crazy humor, there's something real there. Something about how we are as humans. You know, we're drawn to these spectacles, to drama, even when it's, I don't know, kind of messed up.
Yeah, like those reality shows where it's all backstabbing and fighting. We know it's fake, but we still can't stop watching.
Exactly. That's exactly what this scenario is making fun of, right?
Yeah.
It's showing us how much we love to watch chaos unfold, even though we should know better. And it's also kind of warning us, you know, like, hey, be careful, cause this made-up world, it might not be so made up after all.
And that whole thing with Slimy, that giant worm just taking Carlson's place like it's nothing. It's a pretty powerful image, right?
Right.
About how these systems, these power structures, they just keep going no matter what.
It's like, it doesn't even matter who's in charge. the system just rolls on. It makes you think about how we focus so much on individual people, on these big personalities, and we forget about the bigger picture, the structures that are really calling the shots.
It's like the king is dead, long live the king, right? New guy steps in, but nothing really changes.
Exactly. And that's what we need to think about. It's not enough to just swap out the people at the top. We need to look at the systems themselves, the beliefs, the values that keep these cycles of violence and manipulation going. It's a much bigger problem than just one person.
And then there's the whole question of like fate versus free will. God's pulling the strings here, right? He set this whole thing in motion.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting part of the story because it's a question we've been asking forever, right? Do we control our own lives?
Yeah.
Or are we just playing out some script that's already written?
Yeah, and I don't think this scenario tries to give us a definitive answer, but it definitely makes you think about how much agency we really have, if any. And what about divine justice, right? What does that even mean?
Yeah, is it about punishment? Is it about karma? Or is it something way more complex than we can understand?
And let's not forget the power of satire itself, right? This whole thing is a perfect example of how humor can make us face some really uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world.
Satire can be so powerful because it lets us laugh at ourselves,
Yeah.
see our own flaws and hypocrisy, and maybe even start to imagine something better.
So what have we learned from this crazy trip through this messed up world of media and, well, murder?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we're not just passive observers in all of this, right? We have choices to make. We can accept what we're told, or we can question it. We can play along with these systems that hurt people, or we can try to break free.
Yeah, we can change the channel, reject the stories that don't serve us anymore and try to build a better world, a more just world, a less slimy world.
And maybe, just maybe, as this scenario shows us, we can do it with a little bit of humor, a little bit of skepticism, and a whole lot of questioning.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.